Coralie barely registered the crunch of boots on gravel. Her world was narrowing. Fading dot, she swayed forward, chin dropping toward her chest, lips blue from the cold and exhaustion, until a shadow blocked out the morning sun and a pair of strong hands steadied her. Easy, came the voice, deep, grit roughened. Her body slumped sideways. Sawyer caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed nearly nothing. The baby was warmer than she was. He lifted them both, one in each arm and turned without a word. No questions. No judgment. Just the creak of the porch boards and the groan of a heavy door that hadn't been opened in weeks. Inside, the house smelled like firewood, saddle soap, and memories that refused to fade. Sawyer laid Coralie gently on the couch, covered her with a wool blanket, then turned his attention to the infant. The baby girl, eyes too big for her face, lips cracked from crying, looked up at him and made a soft, mewling sound. Sawyer stared at her for a long moment, then went to fetch water. When Coralie opened her eyes again, it was dusk. There were boots by the hearth, a lamp turned low, and the soft smell of cornmeal and beans simmering from the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the fire cracked and she remembered. The gate. The ranch. The stranger who hadn't said a word. She sat up too fast and winced. Easy, came that voice again. Sawyer Cade stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, dish towel over one shoulder. He nodded toward the bundle by the hearth. She's sleeping. Coralie followed his gaze. Her baby was wrapped in a fresh quilt, lying in a wooden cradle that hadn't seen use in years. She tried to speak, failed, tried again. You helped us. He didn't answer, just walked to the kitchen, filled a bowl, and handed it to her. Cornbread, beans, water. She ate like a woman starved. Because she was. Halfway through the bowl, tears began to fall, not sobs. Just silent tears that left clean tracks down her dirt-streaked face. Sawyer didn't ask. He just stood there, arms folded. When she finished, he finally spoke. Where were you headed? Coralie stared into the fire. Anywhere we weren't dying. He waited. Mama caught fever, she whispered. Started last week. No doctor, no neighbors. Papa left a year back. Didn't even bury her right. Sawyer said nothing. Baby's name is Wren, she added quietly. She's all I got. They sat in silence as the wind picked up outside. Over the next 2 days, Coralie barely left the front room. Wren began to eat again. The fever broke. Her tiny hands started to grasp fingers, and Sawyer, though quiet as stone, always seemed to be a step ahead. Warm cloths, broth, firewood stacked by the door. A fresh pair of boots for Coralie when hers finally cracked apart. He spoke rarely, moved deliberately, but his silence wasn't cruel. It was steady. Like fence posts in hard ground. On the third morning, Coralie stepped out onto the porch. The sky was pale blue, the fields quiet. Sawyer was fixing a wheelbarrow out near the barn. She hesitated, then walked over. Wren pressed against her shoulder. You got a wife? She asked. Sawyer paused, looked up. Then shook his head. Coralie stood a moment, shifting on her feet. You mind if we stay a little? Just till I get work. Maybe buy a mule, head south. Sawyer studied her face, then nodded. Word spread in town like it always did. Some said the ghost of North Creek had taken in a wild girl and her bastard babe. Others said the girl had bewitched him, and a few, the ones who knew, Sawyer Cade before the fire, just shook their heads. He finally opened the door, said old Tommy. At the feed store. That's all. The sheriff heard too. He didn't come out right away. But he watched when Coralie came into town for sugar and sewing thread. Watched how she kept her eyes low, shoulders tight. Watched how Wren stared up at strangers with quiet, unnerving focus. Watched how the men stared back at Coralie like she was something they could own. Sawyer came in once. Just once. To the blacksmith. He left a sack of coin heavier than needed and picked up a new axe, 2 shovels, and a hand-forged Horseshoe. When he walked past the saloon, a ranch hand made a joke about what kind of woman needs saving. Sawyer didn't stop walking, but the next morning, that same ranch hand was seen at the doctor's with a split lip and a wrist wrapped tight. Said he'd fallen. Nobody believed him, but nobody questioned it either. By the 5th week, snow dusted the roof. Wren was giggling. Coralie was humming again, and Sawyer had begun clearing out the south barn. He said nothing about it, but every morning there were fresh piles of old hay burned, cobwebs cleared, tools repaired. Corey started helping. Then asking questions. Then telling stories. And though Sawyer said little in return, he listened. Really listened. Corale. He noticed. One night, Wren wouldn't sleep. She was fussy, restless, fighting a fever again. Coralie sat by the fire, holding her tight, whispering soft songs into her ear. Sawyer came in from outside, snow melting on his hat. He stood there a moment, looking at them. Then he knelt beside Coralie, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small, carved wooden bird. He handed it to Wren. Baby stared at it, hiccuped, and finally smiled. Sawyer rose. Coralie looked up at him, eyes glassy. "Thank you," she whispered, but Sawyer was already walking away. The snow deepened. By the 8th week, the porch creaked under its weight, and icicles hung like glass daggers from the eaves. Coralie learned to chop wood with a rhythm that matched her breath. She learned how to start a fire even when her fingers were stiff with cold. She learned that peace could be built, even if it started with silence. Sawyer fixed the chimney flue, repaired the fence near the creek, sharpened every blade in the shed, and one night, without saying anything, he carved Wren a second wooden bird. Coralie found it on the mantel the next morning. No note, no ribbon. Just a gesture that said more than words ever could. The first reel. Trouble came with the thaw. Early March. Mud season. Coralie had gone into town alone. Sawyer was out past the tree line checking on a lost calf. She had Wren in a sling, her hair in a braid, and $2 tucked in her apron. The mercantile was busy. Too busy. She grabbed flour, oats, and a tin of coffee. Was counting change at the counter when she felt it. A hand on her back. Low. Too low. Well, drawled a voice behind her. Didn't know North Creek was hiring help again. She stiffened, turned. Dale Fenwick, rancher. Twice her age. 3 times as cruel. He smiled like he'd already bought her. "Girl like you don't belong out there," he said, stepping closer. "Come work for me. I'll give you a proper roof. Maybe even a real name for that baby." The clerk went still. The room did too. Coralie met Fenwick's eyes. Her voice was low. "I'd rather freeze in a ditch." Fenwick's grin faded. His eyes darkened. He took another step, then paused, because the door had opened. And Sawyer Cade stood there, soaked in trail mud. Silent as stone. His coat dripped. His boots left prints. He didn't say a word, just looked at Fenwick and kept looking, until Dale stepped back, said something under his breath, then turned and left. That night, Coralie didn't speak. She just sat on the floor by the hearth. Wren in her lap, staring into the fire. Sawyer brought her tea. When she didn't take it, he crouched down. Held it there. "He touched me," she whispered. Sawyer didn't flinch. "He tried to make me feel small." She looked up at him, eyes flashing. "But I'm not small." Sawyer held her gaze, then nodded. As if to say, "I know, and maybe I never thought you were." April brought green shoots. The trees blossomed late, but when they did, the whole valley smelled like hope. Corale planted a row of carrots. Then lettuce. She built a chicken run with her own 2 hands. Wren was starting to crawl. Her giggle had become a morning ritual. Sawyer added a small rocking chair beside the fire. He carved it out of cedar. Didn't say why, just left it there one day with a quilt folded on the seat. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday, carried by a rider who didn't dismount, just handed it over and wrote off. Sawyer opened it at the table. Read it once. Then again. Corale. He watched his jaw tighten. He handed it to her without a word. The paper was crisp, the handwriting sharp. She read it slowly, then sat down hard. Her father had died. In a mining camp in Oregon. Left behind a debt. And a brother, a boy named Jacob, her half-brother, 9 years old. Alone. In state custody. Coralie stared at the letter. Long after the ink blurred. He never even told me, she whispered, that he had another child. Sawyer said nothing. We have to go, she added. We have to try. He didn't argue, but his eyes darkened. The next morning, the wagon was packed. Wren was bundled. Coralie dressed in her warmest shawl. And Sawyer climbed into the driver's seat without a word. The road to Oregon was long, but they rode it together. And Coralie had no idea what waited for them at the end. Just that blood was blood, and no child should be left behind. The Oregon Trail wasn't what the books described. It was colder, quieter, and lonelier in its silences. Coralie sat beside Sawyer on the bench seat, Wren bundled in her arms, the wagon wheels creaking with every mile. The land changed, grew harsher. Pines replaced cottonwoods. Snow lingered in shadows even as spring pressed forward. Sawyer said little, but he always handed her the warmer blanket, always checked the axle before camp, always rose first and built the fire. Wren never cried at night, just curled closer. By the 10th day, Coralie's hands were blistered from helping push the wagon over a steep pass. On the 12th, a wheel cracked in a ravine. Sawyer repaired it in silence while Coralie held the lantern and prayed the wind didn't snuff it out. They reached the mining camp outside Bend. 2 days before the thaw. It wasn't much more than shacks and smoke. Men with hard eyes and harder voices watched as they passed. The state officer wore a tired face and a frayed badge. He led them to a bunkhouse at the edge of the hill. Inside sat a boy, barefoot, knees pulled to his chest. Eyes as wide and hollow as the canyon. Corale. He stepped forward slowly. Jacob? The boy didn't move. Sawyer stayed in the doorway. Wren made a soft sound, and something in the boy's face twitched. Coralie crouched down. I'm your sister, she whispered. Didn't know about you, but I know now. That's all that matters. Jacob said nothing, just stared at Wren. Then at Coralee. And finally whispered, You came. She nodded. Swallowed hard. You ready to go? He didn't ask where. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. The trip home took longer. Jacob barely spoke for 3 days, but on the 4th, he asked Sawyer how to start a fire. On the 6th, he asked to hold Wren. By the time the valley opened up again and North Creek Ranch came into view, he was riding up front, pointing at every bird he saw. And when they crossed the gate, Sawyer finally broke his silence. Welcome home. Jacob looked up. A long pause, then. It's big. Coralie laughed for the first time in weeks. Yeah, it is. Spring exploded across the land. New grass, wildflowers, calves in the pasture. Followed Sawyer everywhere. Learned how to oil a hinge, set a post, hold a hammer. He asked 1,000 questions. Sawyer never complained. Coralie watched it all with something between awe and quiet heartbreak. Because they were healing, slowly, together. And even she didn't know what that meant yet. One morning she found Sawyer on the porch, staring west. His hands were clenched. She sat beside him, said nothing for a while. Then, you think they'll come back? He didn't look at her. They always do. Coralie nodded. Then let him. We'll be ready. Trouble returned like thunder on a blue sky day. 3 riders, dusty, armed, not from town, not from the ridge. They came at noon. Rode up bold as brass. Didn't tie their horses. Didn't smile. Sawyer stepped off the porch, coat unbuttoned, eyes narrow. Corale stood in the doorway. one hand behind her back. The man in the center tipped his hat. Afternoon. Heard this place changed hands. Figured we'd come see what was what. Sawyer didn't answer. Name's Parrish, the man continued. These here are my brothers. We do a little livestock trading. Heard you got fresh stock. Coralie's. Grip tightened on the rifle. Wren was behind her. Jacob too. Inside, listening. We're not buying, Sawyer said flatly. Wasn't offering to sell. Sawyer's jaw tensed. Parrish grinned. We'll be back. Think it over. They turned. Rode off. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. That night, Sawyer unlocked the gun cabinet. It hadn't been opened in years. Coralie came in as he was cleaning the rifle. You planning to fight them? He looked up. No, I'm planning to protect what's mine. Coralie stood in silence, then nodded. I'll help. They didn't speak after that. But the next morning, Jacob was up early, hauling logs. Sawyer taught him how to stack them into a fence line. A warning. Parrish came back the next week. With 5 men. You sure? He asked, spitting in the dirt. Sawyer said nothing. Just stepped aside, revealing Jacob, standing on the porch, rifle over his shoulder. Not shaking. Corale beside him, Wren in her arms. Parrish stared for a long time, then turned his horse. Left. Didn't come back. Not that month. Not ever. That night, as the fire crackled and Wren slept between them, Coralie turned to Sawyer. You built all this back up, brick by brick. Sawyer stared at the flames. You did that, he said quietly. Coralie shook her head. No, we did it. All of us. Sawyer looked over at Jacob, who was snoring softly on the rug, and then at Corale, and for the first time he smiled. By midsummer, the ranch was blooming. The garden rose stretched proud beneath the sun. Chickens scratched in their coop. Jacob had taken to waking early without being told. Wren had learned to stand, though she still preferred to crawl at full speed across the porch. Coralie often found herself humming while shelling beans or sweeping the barn loft. The weight that had clung to her ribs for years now rested lighter, not gone, but no longer crushing. Sawyer worked with a quiet intensity. His shirts were faded, his hands calloused again. He'd spend hours fixing hinges no one noticed were broken, or repairing tools before anyone asked. He rarely spoke of the past, but he listened. And when Coralie talked about her mama, or what Wren had babbled that day, or even her wild dreams of one day building a proper schoolhouse nearby, he never interrupted. He just listened, like what she said mattered. And that was more than any man ever gave her before. Trouble came again, in August. Not from guns or threats, but from papers. The sheriff rode up one morning, dust on his shoulders, hat in hand. Sawyer met him halfway down the lane. Coralie stayed on the porch, Jacob sitting beside her, a hammer in hand from a birdhouse he'd been building. They talked low. Too low. When Sawyer returned, his jaw was set tight. What is it? Coralie asked. He handed her the letter. It was from the land office. Something about titles, boundaries. The previous owner's paperwork had never been fully registered. The fire had destroyed half the records. Now someone from out east was claiming ownership. Sawyer's name wasn't on half the deeds, and Coralie's? It wasn't on anything at all. For days they scrambled. Sawyer rode to the county seat twice. Paid a lawyer too much. Coralie pored over what records remained, trying to trace names she didn't recognize. Wren sensed the tension. Grew fussy. Jacob stood guard at the gate with a stick he called his defender. When Sawyer returned the second time, his eyes were bleak. There's no proof, he said. Not the kind they want, just word and memory. Coralie paced, clenched her fists. They can't take it. We've built too much. She stopped. Wait. She rushed to the old writing desk, dug through the bottom drawer, pulled out a half-burned envelope. Inside, her mother's journal, water-stained, torn, but legible. She flipped pages until she found it. A note about Sawyer Cade, the man who took in her daughter. The man who reopened the ranch. Her mother had written it in the last weeks. Dated and signed. Coralie held it out. Would this help? Sawyer stared at it, then nodded. The sheriff returned 3 days later, with him the man from back east, a thin fellow with spectacles and a waxed mustache. He looked around like he already owned the place. Coralie stood on the porch, Wren in one arm, Jacob beside her. Sawyer waited in the yard. They handed over the journal, the deeds, the letter from the county lawyer. The man in spectacles read slowly, then looked at Coralie. You're the one raising this place? She nodded. He looked back down. Frowned. This isn't the name I was told would be here, he muttered. Maybe that's because names don't build fences, Coralie said. People do, the man blinked. You're young. I'm old enough to know land doesn't care about birth certificates. Sawyer said nothing, but his hand rested on the fence post, calm, steady. The sheriff cleared his throat. Well? The man sighed. Technically, it'll need further verification. But this is compelling. He looked at Coralie again. You really carved a school plot behind the orchard? She nodded. He paused. Then smiled. Barely. Maybe you ought to build one. And with that he turned, mounted his horse, and left. That night, they sat on the porch. Wren asleep in her crib, Jacob watching stars, with a book of constellations in his lap. Coralie turned to Sawyer. What would you have done if they took it? He didn't answer right away, then started over. Coralie smiled. Good thing we didn't have to. He glanced at her. You kept that journal? She nodded. Kept a lot of things. Just didn't know why. Sawyer looked down at his hands, then reached over. And for the first time took hers. Middle of part 5. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Summer deepened. Days grew long and golden. Coralie started teaching Jacob letters each morning. Wren learned to speak a handful of words. And one Sunday, without planning it, they all sat down. At the same table, not out of need. But choice. Sawyer said grace for the first time since the war. Coralie didn't cry, but she held his hand a little tighter. Because the prayer wasn't about battles lost. It was about peace found. And for the first time in her life, Coralie Finch believed peace was something she could keep. Autumn settled across North Creek like a soft quilt. The leaves turned copper and flame, the air crisp enough to see your breath by mid-morning. Cattle grew thicker coats. The hens laid slower. The old windmill creaked louder in the evenings. Coralie sat in the half-built schoolhouse, Wren in her lap, tracing the outline of letters carved into a wide board. Jacob stood across the room, reading aloud from a second-hand primer with a concentration that made her chest swell. Sawyer had framed the place by hand. No blueprints. Just quiet hands and memory. Each beam told its own story. Each nail held more than wood. It was a Sunday morning when the letter arrived. Hand-delivered again. No seal. No return name. Just a folded paper. Clean, dry. And dangerous. Sawyer read it. Then passed it to Corlee. She read it twice before speaking. He's coming here? Sawyer nodded once. He? Jacob asked. Sawyer's jaw flexed. Coralie folded the letter. Looked out the window. Who is Clint Mercer? Sawyer didn't answer. Right away, then, a mistake. From before. The name lingered in the air like smoke. That afternoon, Coralie found Sawyer sharpening the edge of a scythe. He didn't look up when she spoke. You gonna tell me the rest? No, she crossed her arms. Then I'm gonna find out anyway. Sawyer set the tool down slowly, sat back on his heels. He was cavalry after the war. Hunted deserters, men like me. Coralie stiffened. You deserted? Sawyer nodded. I was done fighting. My commanding officer wasn't. Mercer came after men like us, not for justice, for bounty. Her throat tightened. What did he do? Sawyer's gaze darkened. He made a game of it. That was all he said. It was all he needed to. The next morning, Coralie rode into town alone. She went to the sheriff first. Then to old Tommy. Then to the preacher. Everywhere she went, she said the same thing. Clint Mercer's riding in. If anyone helps him, they're against us. No one objected, but she saw the fear in their eyes. By nightfall, she was back home. Saddle sore. Dusty. Sawyer was sitting on the porch. He handed her a tin cup. She took it. Sipped. Then, "You're not scared of him?" Sawyer stared into the dark. "I'm scared of what I'll have to become again." She set the cup down. Touched his arm. "You're not that man anymore. Mercer don't care." "Well, I do," she said softly, "and so do they." She nodded toward the window, where Jacob sat reading to Wren. Mercer arrived 3 days later. Alone. He rode a black horse. Tall and too proud. His coat was clean. His boots polished. His smile like a blade. He didn't dismount, just stopped outside the gate and waited. Sawyer stepped out first. Then Corale. Then Jacob. Mercer tipped his hat. Well, look at you. Dressed like a rancher. Smelling like forgiveness." Sawyer said nothing. Mercer chuckled. "I came for what's owed. You ran, Cade. That debt don't vanish." Coralie stepped forward. "Who gave you the right?" Mercer's eyes flicked to her. "Lady, this don't concern you." "She's my family," Sawyer said. "Then she's collateral." Mercer replied. Jacob's hand moved toward the porch rail, where a slingshot lay. "Easy, boy," Mercer warned. Sawyer stepped forward. "You come for a fight?" Mercer shrugged. "I come for a reckoning." They stood there in silence. Until Sawyer finally said, "Then draw." Mercer blinked. "You serious?" "Right here, right now," Mercer grinned. "You sure you still got it?" Sawyer didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. The draw was fast. Too fast for the eye. 2 shots rang out, dust kicked, and when it cleared, Mercer's horse reared. Mercer dropped to the dirt. His gun lay yards away. Sawyer stood still. Smoke curling from his revolver. Mercer groaned. Clutched his leg. "You aimed low," he growled. "I'm not that man anymore," Sawyer said. "But I will be if you make me." They dragged Mercer into town. The sheriff locked him up without a word, and no one asked what had happened. Because they already knew. That night, Sawyer sat alone in the barn. Corale found him there, silent, eyes closed. She knelt beside him. "You didn't kill him." "No, that matters." He looked at her. "Not enough." She touched his hand. "Maybe not to him, but it does to us." They stayed there in the dark. And for the first time, he let her hold the silence. The first frost came early. Jacob woke with ice on the windows and a fire already going. Sawyer had been up before dawn, same as always. Coralie rolled dough in the kitchen, humming to herself while Wren crawled between chair legs like a tiny explorer with a mission. They were rebuilding again, but this time it wasn't survival that drove them. It was choice. Sawyer had started carving a new gate, one with their names burned into the wood. Not just his. It said North Creek Ranch. Finch and Cade. The sheriff came by a week after Mercer's arrest. "Judge signed it this morning," he said, handing over the folded papers. Sawyer took them. "Lands. Yours now, properly filed, verified, sealed." Coralie blinked. "You mean?" The sheriff nodded. "You're official. Ain't nobody gonna challenge it again." Jacob whooped so loud Wren burst into laughter. They held a celebration 2 days later. Not big. Just the neighbors. Old Tommy brought whiskey. The preacher brought cornbread. The sheriff brought his fiddle, and Coralie brought out a dress she hadn't worn since her mama's burial. It was simple, blue, still smelled faintly of cedar. She wore her hair braided up. Jacob helped lace her boots. Sawyer came in from the barn in his best shirt, the one with no stains, and buttons that actually matched. They didn't talk about what it meant. They didn't need to dot at sundown. The yard was filled with music and stomping feet. Jacob danced with Wren in his arms. She squealed with delight, gripping his collar and kicking her feet. Coralie stood near the porch, watching the sky turn peach and rose. Sawyer came up beside her, held out a hand. She hesitated, then took it. They danced slow, silent, swaying beneath the stars' dot, and when the music quieted, and the neighbors drifted off, and the lanterns burned low, he kissed her dot soft, certain, like a man who wasn't asking permission, but offering a vow dot the next morning. The house felt warmer dot, even with frost on the roof. Coralie stirred biscuits, while Sawyer fed the chickens. Jacob chopped kindling. Wren banged a wooden spoon on a skillet dot. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. That evening, Coralie climbed the ladder to the schoolhouse rafters where Sawyer was nailing down the last boards. She carried 2 mugs of cider, handed him one, sat beside him. They watched the sun vanish behind the ridge. "You never asked what I wanted," she said softly. He looked at her, puzzled. "For this land, for this life, you just made room. You deserved it. I didn't know that until you said it without words." Sawyer took her hand. "You still don't know how much." She leaned her head on his shoulder, then said, "Let's make it legal." He stilled. "Marry me," she said. A pause. Then his voice, rough with emotion. "Tomorrow?" She smiled. Tomorrow. The wedding was small. Just the sheriff, the preacher, and a half-dozen neighbors. Wren wore a garland of yellow wildflowers. Jacob read a verse from the good book and didn't stutter once. Sawyer wore the same shirt from the celebration. Coralie wore her mother's shawl. They stood beneath the oak tree by the fence line, held hands, spoke no vows but the truth, and kissed beneath a sky so clear it looked painted. That night, they didn't sleep, not because of nerves, but because they stayed up late at the hearth, telling stories, laughing, remembering. Sawyer told her about the day he first saw her at the gate, half frozen, barely standing. Coralie told him about the bird carving, the one that made Wren smile when she hadn't in days. Jacob wandered out once, sleepy-eyed. "You're still up?" "We're building a memory," Coralie said. He yawned. "You already did." Before dawn, they walked the property together. Whole family. Past the pasture, the orchard, the stream where Jacob swore he saw trout once, even though nobody else had. They stopped at the schoolhouse. Sawyer ran his hand over the new sign. Finch and K. Wren clapped. Corale. He looked at her husband. Yes, husband, and said, "Let's build more." He nodded. Not just at the schoolhouse. But at life, together. The first snow after the wedding came down soft and slow. Coralie stood at the kitchen window, flour on her hands, watching Jacob chase Wren through the yard, while Sawyer stacked firewood along the barn wall. They looked like a family drawn from memory. A life she'd once thought belonged to other people. Now it was hers. She exhaled, warm breath fogging the glass. Behind her, the oven ticked. On the table, a letter lay unopened. It had arrived the day before. No return name. Just a wax seal and the faint scent of tobacco. Smoke. Coralie wiped her hands and reached for it. When she broke the seal and unfolded the parchment, her breath caught. The handwriting was careful, blocked, almost military. It read, "Mrs. Finchcade, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Fletcher. I served with your husband back in the 7th. I was there the night he disappeared from camp. I was also there the day he saved 6 men by stepping into fire. No sane man would cross. He never took credit. But I remember, I've been trying to track him down for years. To return something that belonged to him. I'm headed through your territory. 2 days' time. If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to shake his hand, respectfully." E. Fletcher. Sawyer read the letter without expression. Then handed it back. "Friend of yours?" Coralie asked. Sawyer leaned on the railing, staring at the horizon. "We served together. He took a bayonet to the ribs for me. She waited. He's the only one who knew my name wasn't just a story. Fletcher arrived at dusk. He rode a mule with a limp and wore a coat patched in 3 places. His eyes were sharp but kind. Jacob stared at him like he was a ghost. Sawyer met him at the gate. They shook hands. No words, just a long silence that said everything. Then they embraced. Coralie stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Dinner's hot. Fletcher smiled. I never turned down stew. They ate in the warm glow of the hearth. Jacob asked questions. Wren clapped whenever someone laughed. Fletcher told old stories. Some made Sawyer chuckle. Some made him stare at the flames. Finally, Fletcher reached into his coat, laid something on the table, a locket, dented, old, still smeared with soot. Coral. He picked it up gently. Inside, a drawing, a young woman. A baby. She looked up. Sawyer's face had gone still. That was Sarah, he said softly. My wife, my daughter. Fletcher nodded. You dropped it in the dirt when you ran. I found it days later. Kept it safe. Coralie handed it to him. Sawyer didn't take it. He just stared at it. Then at her. I let go, he said. But I didn't forget. Coralie reached out, closed his fingers around the locket. You're not meant to forget. Just to live. Fletcher stayed the night. Before dawn, he saddled his mule. Jacob handed him a bundle of bread and jerky. Wren waved. Sawyer walked into the gate. You going to keep running cattle? Fletcher asked. Sawyer smiled. I think I'll build more. Fences. Fletcher tipped his hat. Then I'll rest easier. He paused. Glad you lived, Cade. Sawyer nodded. Glad I did too. As Fletcher vanished into the pale morning, Coralie stepped beside her husband. He was a part of you, she said. A piece I never thought I'd see again. She touched the locket in his hand. What will you do with it? Sawyer looked at it for a long time, then walked to the tree behind the barn. The one with the deepest roots. He dug a small hole, buried the locket, pressed the earth flat. Not to forget, he said softly, but to let it rest. That afternoon, Coralie found Jacob in the schoolhouse, hammering new shelves. Why today? She asked. He shrugged. Feels like something new started. Coralie smiled. It did. And outside, as Wren toddled after chickens, and Sawyer drew chalk lines for the new corral, the wind turned warm again. The locket slept beneath the tree, and the past finally began to bloom into something else. Winter came hard that year. Snow stacked high along the eaves. Wind cut through every seam and knothole in the barn. The cattle huddled tight near the shelter, and the chickens refused to leave their coop for 3 straight days. But inside the house, it was warm. Sawyer had finished sealing the windows in October. Jacob kept the woodpile stacked tall. Coralie's preserves lined the pantry like glass jewels. Plums, peaches, beans, corn. Wren had begun taking her first steps without falling. They measured her progress in giggles and the soft patter of socks across floorboards. One night as the wind howled outside, Coralie woke to a sound she hadn't heard in months. Sawyer shouting, not loud, but urgent, guttural. She rose, heart pounding, and found him at the hearth, shirt drenched in sweat, eyes wide with sleep and memory. She knelt. Sawyer, it's all right. You're home. He blinked at her, took a long breath, then another. I saw fire, he whispered. She took his hand. And you're safe. The next morning, he didn't speak of it, but he worked harder than ever, fixed the hinge on the south barn, repaired the sled runners, salted every barrel of meat twice. Coralie watched him wear himself thin. That night, she stopped him. You can tell me. He looked away. I saw the fire, again. Same as Deadwood. She waited. I keep thinking it'll fade. But it comes back. Like it wants something. She stepped forward. It wants to be carried with help. Not alone. He closed his eyes. Then help me. For 3 nights they talked. Sawyer told her stories she hadn't heard. Not even when they'd first married, about the boy who didn't survive the river crossing. The sergeant with the hollow eyes. The woman who smuggled letters sewn into her dress and paid with her life. Coralie listened. Not just with her ears, with her whole being. And after the third night, he slept through the storm. By January, the snow had hardened to a crust. Jacob took to sliding across it with a length of old roofing tin. Wren laughed every time he fell. Coralie began drawing plans, not just for the spring planting. But for a real schoolhouse. With 2 rooms, a bell, a stove. She brought her sketches to Sawyer one evening. Think we can do it? He didn't look at the drawings, he looked at her. You drew it, we'll build it. In town, word was spreading. They weren't just surviving out at North Creek anymore. They were changing things. Old Tommy said it best at the Mercantile. Dirt's richer near 'em. Weather breaks sooner. Don't know what it is, but that place breathes different now. Even the sheriff noticed. When he rode out to deliver tax forms, he found Jacob leading a spelling lesson under the porch eaves, Wren scrawling with charcoal on a plank, and Coralie drafting window placements with her boots in the snow. He tipped his hat. You building something? Sawyer nodded. A future. February brought one more storm. Hard, fast, relentless. For 2 days, they couldn't open the front door. The wind howled like grief itself, but they had warmth, they had food, they had each other. Coralie spent those nights reading aloud by lamplight. Wren curled up against her chest, Jacob half asleep on the rug. Sawyer leaned in the doorway, watching. Don't look at me like that, she teased one night. Like what? Like I'm a fire you didn't expect to find lit. He stepped closer, because that's exactly what you are. When the storm finally broke, the world outside glistened like silver. And the path to the barn was clear, because Jacob had risen at dawn, shoveled every inch, left a note on the table. For my sister, for Wren, for the schoolhouse. Coralie read it twice, then set it beside her coffee cup like scripture, because sometimes scripture comes from a boy who once wouldn't speak. The thaw came slowly. The fence posts reappeared, one by one. The horses kicked up soft earth. The birds returned to the trees, and in the far pasture, beneath the same tree where Sawyer had buried the locket, new grass began to grow. The thaw was slow, but it was sure. By March's second week, the sound of dripping water was constant. Ice melted in long streams off the roof. The creeks overflowed their banks, humming with new urgency. Coralie stood at the edge of the schoolhouse frame, her boots sunk in mud, marking the depth with her toe. Need gravel, she muttered. Sawyer stood beside her, arms folded. And time. We've got both. He nodded, and added, and sweat. Plenty of that. She smiled, adjusting her shawl as the breeze picked up. You complaining? He looked sideways at her. I married a woman who makes me dig trenches. I've got nothing to complain about. They spent that week rebuilding. Not from ruin, but for the future. Jacob laid out books in the temporary classroom on the porch. Wren helped him alphabetize, which mostly involved putting everything in one pile and clapping proudly. Coralie took measurements for desks. Sawyer fixed the broken stovepipe in the east corner. Neighbors began to drop by. Mrs. Leland brought 2 chairs and a bell. Old Tommy arrived with a box of slates and chalk wrapped in flannel. Even the preacher offered help. You planning sermons in here? Coralie teased. He laughed. Only if the spelling tests get too heated. One evening, a wagon creaked up the trail. They didn't recognize it. The driver was a young man. Thin, pale, with dark eyes and city clothes. He dismounted with practiced grace. Finchcade residence? Sawyer stepped forward. You found it. The man handed him a sealed letter from the Department of Education. They heard about your school. Coralie took the envelope, broke the seal. Her eyes widened. They want to send a representative. Help get it certified. The young man nodded. It's rare. But they said something about a model frontier institution. Jacob leaned over her shoulder. What's that mean? Coralie grinned. It means someone noticed. The next 2 weeks were a flurry. Coralie scrubbed the porch with vinegar, and Jacob redid every side. Wren helped decorate the blackboard with chalk flowers. Sawyer spent 2 full days sanding the pew benches until they shone. The inspector arrived mid-morning. A tall woman in a gray traveling coat and wire spectacles. She walked slowly through the schoolhouse, listened to Jacob recite the alphabet, watched Wren try to read upside down. Saw the slates, the bell, the row of books by the stove. Then she turned to Coralie. You built this? Coralie swallowed. Yes, ma'am, with help. The inspector nodded. Looks like you're teaching more than spelling here. That night, the inspector stayed for supper. They served roasted squash, beans, and cornbread with honey. She didn't smile until dessert. Then she surprised them all. My mother was a teacher, started in a shack with 1 desk. Said it wasn't about the walls, it was about the will. She set her cup down. You've got the will. Coralie blinked. Does that mean you'll be certified? As of next month. North Creek Schoolhouse will be official, Jacob whooped. Wren threw her spoon. Sawyer grinned quietly. Coralie laughed and wiped her eyes with her apron. That night, after Wren had fallen asleep in Jacob's lap and the dishes had been cleared, Sawyer walked out to the porch and stood in the moonlight. Coralie joined him. She took his hand. You think we're ready for what comes next? He didn't answer at first. Then said, What do you mean by next? She touched her stomach. Another one. He turned, face unreadable. Then, you sure? She nodded, eyes shining. He didn't speak. Just pulled her into his arms. Held her close and whispered, Then we build one more room. Spring dawned bright and clean. Sawyer painted the front of the schoolhouse. Jacob dug a new flower bed. Wren danced with the chickens, and Coralie, holding a quiet new secret close, walked the ridge trail at sunset, watching the land below her. Their land, and felt something deeper than pride. A sense that life, after all the fire and sorrow and frost, was finally giving back. June arrived with heat that shimmered on the road and turned the creek to glass. The orchard bloomed thick. Bees buzzed so loud you could hear them through the windows. Tomatoes fattened on the vine. Peas climbed their twine poles like green ladder. Rungs to the sun, Coralie's belly swelled. Round and radiant. Wren began bringing her wildflowers each morning, sometimes with roots still attached. So it won't die, she explained. Jacob practiced reading under the elm tree. He could finish whole pages now without stammering once. And Sawyer watched them all with a quiet joy he no longer feared. The schoolhouse had 15 students by mid-June. The porch steps needed repair. So Sawyer brought in lumber, and Coralie called for a work day. Neighbors arrived with saws, hammers, laughter. The preacher brought lemonade. Mrs. Leland brought peach cake. Jacob led the younger kids in sanding planks. Wren painted her name under the windowsill and declared it permanent. By sundown, the steps gleamed like oak honey. That night, Coralie sat on the new porch and rubbed her stomach. Safe, she whispered. We made it safe. Then the letter came. It bore the crest of the Federal Land Office. Sawyer read it once. Then again. Corale watched his face darken. What is it? They're claiming we built the schoolhouse beyond our deeded boundary. Coralie stared. That's a lie. He nodded. But it's a bureaucrat's lie, which means we have to fight it in their way. The town hall meeting was packed. Sawyer stood at the front, flanked by Coralie, Jacob, and the preacher, the mayor. Read the claim aloud. Half the room groaned. Old Tommy stood up. I seen him mark that land myself. 10 feet clear inside their fence. Mrs. Leland added, That school saved my grandson's life. He didn't talk before. The inspector from the Department of Education spoke next. I certified this site personally. If there's a dispute, It's not with the family, it's with the record keeping. By the end, the mayor folded the letter and said, "We'll file a correction." And that was that. Almost. On the way home, Sawyer stopped the wagon. He stared at the schoolhouse. Then sighed. I've been scared this would all disappear. That we'd wake up and it'd be gone. Coralie touched his hand. Nothing built with love disappears. Not really. That Sunday, Coralie stood at the front of the schoolhouse. She looked out at the pews, at the children, at Sawyer, and said, "This isn't just a school. It's a promise." She touched her belly, to them, and to the ones not born yet. Jacob stepped forward. Held up a small wooden plaque. Sawyer had carved it the night before. North Creek Schoolhouse, founded by love, held by grace. They nailed it over the door. The bell rang. And summer began. Coralie went into labor on the 4th of July. Under the same oak tree where they were married. The sun was high, the air dry. Sawyer held her hand. Jacob kept Wren occupied with fireflies in a jar. It was hard, fierce, but not frightening. She was never alone. When the baby came, it was a girl, dark-haired, wide-eyed, quiet as a prayer. Coralie wept. Sawyer kissed her brow. "She's got your hands," Coralie whispered, "and your eyes." They named her Hope. Because it felt true. Hope slept between them that night. A tiny ember of something eternal. And as the stars burned over the ridge, and Jacob snored soft on the floor, and Wren curled up with a doll at her side, Coralie knew. Never be the same, because they were finally whole, not perfect, but whole, and whole is more than enough. April came with wild wind and laughing skies. The grass turned green in a rush. Trees budded like they couldn't wait. And birdsong returned in thick waves before sunrise. Coralie moved slower now, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. She had a second child growing inside her, and her every step carried double the meaning. Jacob noticed first. He adjusted his chores without being asked, took over the heavier lifting, fed the animals before she could. Wren noticed next. She began curling herself around Coralie's belly when she napped, whispering things like, "Hello, baby, and I'm your sister." Sawyer, of course, had known all along. But now he moved with the same quiet grace he had in war, methodical, watchful, unshakable. The schoolhouse opened officially on the 3rd Monday in April. The bell rang at 8 o'clock. .m.7 children came that first morning. 2 from the East Ridge, 3 from the Valley. 1 little girl whose parents had only moved out west that winter. And Jacob. He wore a clean shirt and slicked his hair, though it refused to stay down. Coralie stood at the front, hands trembling, just enough to remind her she still cared. "Welcome," she said. The children were quiet. Then Wren piped up from the back corner where she was pretending to read. "She means hi." They all laughed, and just like that, the schoolhouse lived. The days blurred with chalk and laughter. They learned to spell by reading signs Jacob had made. They learned math by counting fence posts. They learned history from the preacher, who volunteered once a week to tell stories of the Revolution and Civil War. Sawyer built a bookshelf with Jacob. Then a globe stand, then a row of coat hooks, carved with each child's name. It became more than a schoolhouse. It became a place of becoming. One day in early May, a girl named Clara stopped mid-reading. Coralie crouched beside her. "Need help?" Clara pointed to the word, brave. "Why's that word got rave in it?" Coralie thought, then said, "Maybe because being brave is loud sometimes. And sometimes it's quiet, but your heart feels like it's shouting." Clara nodded solemnly. "I think I'm a quiet brave." Coralie kissed her forehead. "I think you are too." Trouble returned like a shadow at sundown. It rode in the form of a telegram, crumpled in the sheriff's saddlebag. He delivered it without ceremony, hat in hand. Sawyer read it. "Then read it again." Coralie waited. "What is it?" "A name I haven't seen in 12 years. He handed it to her. The message was short. "Eli Cade released. Paroled to state. Last known heading. West.Corale. Read it again. Your brother. Sawyer's face was stone. He's not like me. For days, tension hung in the air. Sawyer spent long hours fencing the south pasture. Coralie found herself checking locks twice. Sometimes 3 times. Jacob asked questions. Coralie answered simply. Family doesn't always mean safe. And Jacob nodded. Because he knew that better than most. On the 12th morning, Eli arrived. No fanfare. No warning. Just a figure on a pale horse. Slowing near the ridge gate, Coralie saw him first. He dismounted like he'd never learned grace. Walked with the sway of a man who had forgotten how to stand still. Sawyer met him halfway. Down the lane. No words passed between them for a long time. Then, "You're heavier than I remember. And you're grayer." They stood. 2 brothers. A war and a lifetime between them. Coralie approached slowly. Wren gripped her skirt. Jacob had one hand on the bell rope. Eli looked rough, gaunt, his eyes too bright, but his voice was low when he said, "I don't want trouble. Just a chance to sleep inside 4 walls." Sawyer looked at Corale. She nodded once. "You get one night," he said. That night, Eli sat at the table, didn't eat much. Didn't speak much either. Wren offered him a drawing. He blinked at it. Horse." "No," she said. "It's a roof." He stared at it for a long time, then said, "I didn't know drawings could mean hope." Coralie smiled. "Everything can, if you want it to." In the dark hours before dawn, Sawyer found Eli sitting outside. "You planning to leave?" he asked. Eli nodded. "I break things, always have." Sawyer looked out over the land. Then, "Maybe it's time you fix one." Eli didn't answer, just stood, shook his brother's hand, and walked into the trees. The next day, Coralie marked a new row in the garden. She called it the Eli plot, planted lavender and beans, and set a small rock there with the word chance. August came like fire. Dust clung to the grass. The creek ran low, and the sun never seemed to set, just bled out slow across the hills, turning everything bronze and breathless. Coralie carried hope in a sling across her chest. Wren stuck close beside her. Chasing shade. Jacob built a windscoop for the schoolhouse window, and Sawyer soaked the porch boards with water every morning to keep them cool. Even the horses stood still in the pasture, tails swishing in rhythm, waiting for the mercy of dusk. Then, one evening, thunder, a promise. Coralie smelled rain before it fell, earthy, electric. She ran her fingers through Hope's hair and whispered, "It's coming." And it did. In torrents. The sky cracked wide. Rain pounded the roof like fists. The family gathered by the front windows, watching the world go clean. Jacob raised his arms like a conductor. Wren shouted, "It's washing the sky." Sawyer just watched, silent, hands on Coralie's shoulders. Hope slept through it all. Like she knew nothing could hurt her here. With the rain came change. Crops revived. The orchard sang again, and people from farther out began to visit. Word had spread. About the school, the family, the miracle on the ridge. Some came with questions, some with children, some just to see if the rumors were true. They were. One man rode in from Clear Fork, said his daughter hadn't spoken since her mother died. He left her with Coralie for a day. The girl spoke 3 words by sundown: "I feel safe." Coralie started a journal. Not for herself, for Hope. Each night, after everyone slept, she'd write by lamplight. "Today you smiled when the bell rang. You like order." Or music. Jacob taught Wren to tie a knot. He's got patience no one expected. Sawyer kissed me on the neck when I burned the stew. That man forgives quicker than he speaks. She filled page after page. Not to capture time, but to leave a trail. In case one day someone else needed to find their way back to love. Late August brought a letter with strange handwriting. Coralie opened it with steady hands. Inside was a single sentence: I'm coming to see the girl who once gave me her coat. There was no name. Sawyer read it, then glanced at her. Friend? She nodded slowly. Someone I helped, before all this. He didn't ask more. Didn't need to. 3 days later, a woman arrived on foot. Hair in a long braid. Eyes sharp, tired. She carried nothing. Coralie stepped out. Recognition came like sunlight. I gave you my coat in Tulsa. Coralie said. The woman nodded. You saved me. Coralie shook her head. I just gave warmth. You did the saving. The woman stayed 2 nights, told stories. Wren shouldn't have heard, but listened to wide-eyed anyway. Showed Jacob how to trap quail. Told Sawyer, you married the strongest soul west of the Rockies. He replied, tell me something I don't. No. Before she left, she pressed something into Coralie's hand, a small silver cross. Kept me alive. She said. Corale folded her fingers around it. You're always welcome here. The woman paused. You built a world from kindness. That's rare. Then she was gone. September arrived with golden leaves and cool breath. The baby grew. Jacob started sketching. Wren learned how to write her name with only 1 backward letter. Coralie sat beneath the oak tree with hope asleep on her chest, and thought, Mama would have smiled at this. She would have said, it wasn't the storm that defined you, it was what you built after. And Coralie would have answered, I built what I needed. A home, a life, a future that didn't ask for permission. That night, Sawyer kissed her knuckles by lamplight. They sat in silence a while. Then he said, I want to build something else. What? She asked. A porch swing. She laughed. And nodded. Because that's how it always started. Not with plans. But with love. October whispered in slow. Leaves turned gold, then red, then loosed themselves to the wind like memories. The mornings began with frost. The stove in the schoolhouse needed tending by dawn. And Sawyer, true to his word, built a porch swing out of oak and rope and patience. Coralie nursed hope there most mornings, wrapped in wool. Eyes on the ridge. The land had changed, not just the crops or the cow or the buildings, but the feeling. It felt blessed, or maybe just well tended. One morning, Jacob didn't come in for breakfast. Coralie found him behind the barn, sitting in the grass, staring at something in his hands. A letter, folded small. Torn at the edge, she knelt beside him. He didn't look up. It's from my father, he said. Her breath caught. I didn't know he could write. Jacob nodded. He wants to visit, says he's clean now. Says he's ready to know the man I became. Coralie waited. What do you want? She asked softly. Jacob didn't answer. Not. Then. That week, Jacob wrote back. Short. Careful. You may visit. One day only. This is my home now. Coralie read it. Said nothing, but Sawyer squeezed the boy's shoulder that night. Harder than usual. When the man arrived, he was smaller than Jacob remembered. Older, gray at the edges, but his eyes were familiar. He stepped down from the wagon, looked around at the fence line, the porch swing, the laughter in the schoolhouse. This ain't what I pictured, he said. Jacob stood in the yard. Arms crossed. It's better. They sat on the porch for 2 hours. Spoke little. Sawyer watched from a distance. Hope slept against Coralie's chest. Wren picked apples with the preacher. When the man left, he turned once at the gate. You've got good people. You chose right. Jacob didn't reply, just watched him ride away. That night, Coralie asked if he was okay. Jacob shrugged. He's not who I needed. But I am who I needed. She kissed his forehead and knew he was right. Late October brought a chill that bit through coats. They butchered and salted. Stacked firewood. Coralie mended winter quilts. And one afternoon, Sawyer found her humming at the stove. He paused, smiled. That song. She turned. My mother used to sing it. Mine too, he said. They stood in silence for a moment. then sang the last verse together. And when the world is hard and cold, I'll build a fire, strong and bold. Halloween came with cider and hayrides. The schoolhouse held a costume day. Wren dressed as a raccoon. Jacob as a newspaper man. Coralie wore her mother's old shawl. Said it made her feel safe. A new child joined the class that day. Timid, pale, thin hands. Coralie welcomed her with a mug of warm milk. The girl clung to her skirt. Do I have to leave? No, Coralie whispered. Not if you don't want to. She stayed. That night, Coralie wrote in the journal. Hope smiled when Wren tickled her feet. Jacob read 3 chapters without stumbling. Sawyer carved pumpkins with the kids and didn't flinch when one called him Papa. She paused, then added, today was full. On the final night of October, the wind rose, not fierce, but full of movement. Coralie stood on the porch swing, baby in arms, watching the trees bend. Sawyer joined her. Storm coming? No, she said. Just change. He took her free hand. Together they watched the stars vanish behind the clouds. Not afraid. Just ready. November came in gray, the kind of sky that hovered just above the rooftops and made every sound feel close, personal. Even the chickens seemed quieter. Coralie rapped. Hope tighter each morning. Jacob lit the schoolhouse stove before anyone else. Arrived. Wren insisted on wearing mittens, even indoors. Sawyer chopped wood like it insulted him. They were preparing for winter. For stillness, for something they hadn't yet named. The silence was interrupted by a letter, stamped, sealed, formal. It was from the state. Sawyer opened it slow, read it twice, then handed it to Corled. Her eyes scanned and widened. They want to award us. Sawyer raised a brow. The governor's education office says North Creek Schoolhouse is being named a beacon site, first ever west of the river. Coralie sat down. She laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. Jacob ran out to ring the bell. Wren screamed something about needing new ribbons. Hope drooled on her fist. And Sawyer grinned like a man who finally saw the finish line. The ceremony was set for the 15th. Guests would come. Officials, reporters. Coralie baked nonstop. Pies, biscuits, 3 whole hams. Sawyer built benches from reclaimed barnwood. Jacob wrote his speech. Tore it up. Wrote it again. Wren practiced. Curtsying. Hope learned to sit without toppling over. And the schoolhouse gleamed like morning. They came in wagons, on horseback, some even on foot, more than 50. The preacher opened in prayer. The inspector spoke second, her voice proud. Coralie spoke last. She wore her mother's shawl and cradled Hope in one arm. She looked out over the crowd and said, this started with one girl hiding in a barn, but it grew. Because people chose kindness over fear, work over comfort, and family chosen or born over anything else. Then she paused, looked at Jacob, Wren, Sawyer, and I would do it all again. Every storm, every frost, every doubt, because this ... She gestured around them. This is worth it. They rang the bell 5 times that day. For every child learning, for every parent believing, for every life rebuilt. And as the guests left, one by one, many lingered. Touched the porch rail. Studied the carved plaque. Stared at Coralie with a kind of reverence. Like she was something sacred. That maybe she was. That night, after the fire burned low and the children slept, Sawyer held her close. Still think you were a burden? He whispered. She smiled into his chest. No, she said. I think I was a spark. He kissed the top of her head, and I was dry kindling. They fell asleep like that. Woven together, warm beyond the wood stove's reach. The first snow came. A week later, soft, steady. It wrapped the schoolhouse in white, covered the fields like forgiveness. Coralie stood at the window, baby in arms. Sawyer came up behind her. Looks different every season, he said. It's always beautiful, she replied. He nodded. Because you're in it. They lit candles that night. Sang together on the table, and Coralie, her heart full, her hands never empty, thought, I was born into sorrow. Raised in dust, but I chose something else. And the choosing saved me. She opened her journal one last time that night, wrote simply, Hope took her first step today. Toward me. And underlined it twice. Then she closed the book, turned down the lamp and leaned into the warmth of everything she'd built. January arrived soft. The kind of quiet that blanketed fences and erased the sharp lines of things. Trees bowed low with snow. The schoolhouse door creaked more often than it opened. And time, for a while, felt like it belonged to them alone. Coralie spent more time writing than speaking. Hope had grown bold, toddling from chair to chair. Wren insisted she could braid her own hair now, though it came out crooked and proud. Jacob began building a tiny sled from scrap wood, and Sawyer, ever steady, taught Hope how to walk the length of the porch without falling. On the 6th, a letter came from the east. Corale, you recognized the handwriting. Sharp, slanted. Her aunt. She opened it in the schoolhouse, after dismissing class early for frostbite warnings. It said simply, I'm sick and sorry. If you want closure, come. Sawyer read it twice. Said nothing, but when she packed her bag, he loaded the wagon. She left at dawn. Jacob kissed her hand like a knight. Wren whispered, Bring me back a city rock. Hope waved and said, Ma. And Sawyer pressed a note into her palm. Your strength lives here. Even when you don't. The journey was long. Days of wind, cold, silence. Nights in rented rooms where the walls were too thin and the beds too soft. When she arrived, the house was smaller than she remembered, and her aunt was thinner, but her eyes still sharp. You came, the woman rasped. Coralie nodded. I didn't come for your apology. I came to end it right. They sat in silence. Then the woman whispered, I was wrong. But I didn't know how else to live. Coralie folded her hands. I do now. She left the next morning. No goodbyes. Just a door closing soft. She stopped by a park on the way out. Picked up a flat gray stone for Wren, then headed west, toward home. When she returned, the porch light was on. Sawyer stood in the doorway. Hope shrieked and ran. Coralie lifted her into her arms, buried her face in baby-soft hair, and finally breathed. They ate stew that night. Coralie said little until Jacob asked, Did she die? She shook her head. No, but the past did. February brought thaw. Small at first, trickles under the eaves. Damp boot prints on the floor. The schoolhouse filled again. Children louder, laughter longer. Coralie brought in seeds. Laid them out in tiny cups. Each child picked one. Wren chose sunflower. Jacob picked thyme. Hope slapped her palm on a squash seed and squealed. We'll plant these come spring, Coralie said. They cheered like she'd promised treasure. That night, Sawyer whispered, What do you want this year to be? She answered, Ours. He nodded. And didn't say another word, because nothing else needed. Saying winter was ending. Not with a roar, but with kindness. Soft thaw, open hands, and one woman who once hid in a barn, now standing tall at the center of a life built from ashes. March blew and restless, the kind of wind that tapped window panes and stirred sleep from even the deepest corners. The ground stayed frozen in the morning, but gave way to mud by noon. Boots stayed by the door. Hope discovered puddles. Wren declared herself a scientist and spent entire afternoons charting cloud shapes. Jacob began sketching birds he couldn't name, and Coralie? She started dreaming again, not of survival, but of possibilities. One morning, the schoolhouse smelled of rain and chalk and something sweeter anticipation. Coralie handed out notebooks. You're going to write stories, she told them. Wren shouted. I'm already on chapter 2. Jacob blushed and said he'd rather draw. Coralie smiled. Then draw your story. Everyone's got one. Even the shyest child, Marla, who still flinched at loud sounds, wrote a single line. Once, I was afraid. Coralie read it later and wept. Sawyer rebuilt the barn roof with Jacob's help. They worked in silence most days. But at night Jacob repeated things Sawyer had said, like scripture: measure twice, cut once. A thing worth doing's worth finishing. No shame in getting it wrong if you plan to learn right. Coralie watched from the porch and thought, they found each other. Not by blood, but by choice, and what's stronger than that? Mid-March, Wren found a nest with 4 blue eggs in the old apple tree. She stood guard with a broom, hollering at crows and staring down raccoons. When they hatched, she named each chick after storybook heroes. Coralie wrote the names in her journal. Not because the birds would remember, but because Wren would. One evening, they gathered around the fire. Jacob read a poem he'd written. This house isn't made of wood. It's made of second chances, of soup shared and secrets kept, of hands held in the dark, and hope passed from palm to palm like a lantern. Coralie said nothing. Just pulled him close and held on. Then came the travelers. First one, then 2 more, then a whole family with eyes like fear and coats too thin. They'd heard of the school, of the woman with the journal, of the man who made fences hold. They asked nothing, just stood at the gate. Coralie opened it. You hungry? The father nodded. She waved them in. Sawyer brought wood for the stove. Wren gave the baby her old scarf. Jacob laid blankets out like a map of welcome. Hope toddled forward, hands out. The mother began to cry. That night Coralie wrote, home isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you make room for. She tucked the page into Hope's old quilt. One day, she'd give it to someone else. Someone new, because everything worth having grows best when shared. March ended with green pushing up through thaw. Wren's sunflower sprouted. Jacob single quotes S-time leafed out small but proud. The squash seed cracked open with promise. And Hope little, fierce, beloved Hope squealed at it all. As if the whole world had bloomed just for her. Coralie stood in the doorway, hand in Sawyer's. Heart steady, voice soft. It's starting again. He kissed her temple. It never stopped. The wind calmed. The sun lingered longer. And the ranch, once silent with sorrow, hummed with the sound of new beginnings. April arrived with birdsong. Dawn came earlier now, and with it the sounds of chicks chirping, the creak of porch boards, the steady scrape of a hoe in wet soil. The whole land exhaled. Coralie rose before the children. She'd stand on the porch in her shawl, tea steaming in one hand, Hope pressed warm to her hip, and she'd watch the mist rise off the hills like ghosts retreating. There was peace in the rhythm. There was purpose in the repetition, and there was Sawyer. Always nearby, always steady. On the 10th, the preacher stopped by with news. A new circuit had opened south of the ridge. Folks down there need a school, and someone to help them build it. Sawyer looked at Coralie. Jacob sat straighter. Wren gasped, we can build another school? Coralie smiled, we can teach them how. They spent that Sunday drawing plans. Jacob sketched roof beams. Wren collected ideas for games and songs. Coralie flipped through her journals, pulling old notes and favorite quotes. We don't give them a replica, she said. We help them build their own story. Sawyer nodded. And fetched his tool belt. 2 weeks later, they loaded the wagon, not to leave forever, just for 3 days. Enough to share what they'd learned. Enough to plant seeds. Coralie left Hope in the care of the preacher's wife. It broke her heart. But Hope waved and said, go help. So she did. The town south of the ridge was called Alder Run. It was smaller than she expected. And wearier. The schoolhouse had no roof. The bell had no rope. But the children had light in their eyes. Coralie taught by the stump of a broken post, her skirt coated in dust, her throat hoarse from projecting over hammering. But the children listened, and the mothers wept. And the fathers worked beside Sawyer with quiet respect. On the last night, They held a bonfire. Jacob read another poem. Wren sang. Coralie handed out folded scraps of paper. You'll each write one dream, and you'll plant it tomorrow under the front step. Let it grow with your school. No one questioned it. They wrote, they buried, and the fire crackled like something sacred. Back home, Hope ran across the field to greet them. She fell into Coralie's arms. I painted, Mama, she shouted, and I didn't even eat it this time. The preacher's wife smiled, tired and proud. You've got a stubborn one. Coralie grinned. I know. That night, Coralie bathed Hope by lantern light. The water steamed. The soap smelled like lavender. Hope splashed. Wren brushed her doll's hair nearby. Jacob read a book aloud, mispronouncing every third word just to make them laugh. And Sawyer, sitting by the fire, watched it all like a man who had once lost everything, now trying to memorize joy. Before bed, Coralie wrote in her journal, we didn't go to build a school, we went to remind them they could. She paused, then added, and maybe to remind ourselves. Spring had come, not with fireworks, but with hands in soil. With the stubborn return of green. With a woman who once ran from the world, now helping it rebuild, one lesson, one child, one home at a time. May brought music. Wind in the grass, birds on the eaves, boots stomping in rhythm, a hammer tapping down a nail, but more than that, laughter. Deep, rich, frequent. Hope told knock-knock jokes that made no sense. Wren taught the younger children to dance. Jacob whittled flutes out of elderwood, and Coralie found herself humming again without realizing it. Sawyer heard her once in the kitchen and leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Haven't heard that tune since the night you arrived. She looked up, surprised. It's been that long? Not long at all, he said. With the weather dry and warm, they opened the schoolhouse windows wide. Children read aloud while bees hummed in the wildflowers beyond. One afternoon, Wren brought in a wounded sparrow. He flew into the glass, she said, eyes wet. Coralie held the tiny bird, breath shallow, wings twitching. She wrapped it in soft cloth, set it in a shoebox by the stove, and said, we wait. That night, the bird died. Wren cried until her throat hurt. Sawyer dug a small grave beneath the apple tree. They buried it with a dandelion crown. Sometimes, Coralie whispered, love doesn't save, but it always matters. The next day, they held a moment of silence in class. Jacob made a little wooden marker. Hope stomped in the mud and said, bye-bye, bird. And Wren? She dried her eyes and began drawing other birds, one still flying. Mid-May brought the traveling librarian. She came once a season with a wagon full of books. Coralie hugged her tight. We need more stories about girls who run things, Wren declared. The librarian laughed. So do we all. She left them with a new crate of titles. Hope dragged everyone into the house by herself. Coralie didn't stop her. That Sunday, the preacher asked Coralie to speak. Not about faith, but about rebuilding. She stood at the front, hands trembling a little. We are not the sum of what we've lost, she said. We are the shape of what we've dared to plant after. Then she looked at Sawyer, and the ones who helped us hold the shovel. That night, they danced. No reason. Just a fiddle, a cleared floor, and the smell of supper lingering in the beams. Wren spun in circles, until she fell laughing. Jacob swayed awkwardly with the librarian's apprentice. Hope clapped off beat. Coralie and Sawyer moved slow, together. This is joy, she whispered. No, he said, eyes warm. This is you. She wrote late that night. There are kinds of healing that don't make noise, like a wound closing in the dark, like forgiveness you don't announce, like love, steady as a fence post, deep in the earth. She folded the page, placed it in the bottom drawer, for a time when she'd need reminding, because even peace has seasons. As May faded, Coralie woke early to find Hope asleep on her chest. Sawyer curled around them both. She didn't move, didn't need to. because everything she once begged the stars for was here. Breathing. Warm. Real. And still growing. June came bright and green. The kind of green that feels like a promise. Fields waved with new growth. The orchard buzzed. The creek sang louder. Everything was alive. And so was she. Coralie wore her hair braided now, long down her back, a ribbon from Wren tied through the end. She walked lighter, laughed deeper, cried less but felt more. Hope turned too. They held a picnic by the river. Jacob carved her a wooden duck. Wren made her a crown of daisies. Sawyer built her a swing that hung from the big oak. Coralie baked honey cake and whispered a prayer. When she lit the candle, not a prayer for rescue, but one of thanks. The schoolhouse closed for summer. But the learning didn't stop. Wren read aloud to Hope each morning. Jacob taught the younger children to draw maps and find true north. Sawyer taught them how to fix a hinge, set a fence post, listen for shifts in weather. Coralie planted a garden behind the house with the kids. Each row labeled in blocky letters. Each seed a vote of confidence in tomorrow. One afternoon, a stranger rode in. A woman. Tall, tired, dust on her sleeves. She asked for Coralie by name. They sat on the porch. The woman held out a crumpled letter. I was where you were. Heard your story. Read your words. Coralie read the letter. It was hers. One she'd written months ago, shared with a traveling preacher, then forgotten. The woman said, "It saved me." Coralie said nothing, just took her hand and squeezed. That night, she added to her journal, "Truth echoes. Kindness multiplies. Healing becomes a map for those still lost." She left the page open. Let the night air dry the ink. The next day, the woman stayed, not forever, just long enough to eat, to sleep, to help in the garden. Then she left with supplies and a list of names. Places where others might help. Wren waved until she vanished into dust. Hope said, "She'll come back." Coralie whispered, "Or someone else will." Late June. Thunder rolled in. A real storm. Wind, rain, lightning that split the horizon. The schoolhouse roof held. The barn didn't. They lost a corner. The morning after, Sawyer and Jacob worked side by side. Wren helped gather fallen branches. Coralie walked the orchard rows, whispered thanks for every unbroken stem, and held Hope close when the thunder grumbled again. By the end of the month, the days were long and golden. Evenings stretched forever. One twilight, they all sat on the porch. Hope on Sawyer's lap, Wren brushing a doll's hair, Jacob reading a dusty encyclopedia out loud in a deep voice, pretending to be a scholar. Coralie wrote on a scrap of paper, "I am no longer the girl who ran. I am the woman who stayed, who built, who healed, and who said yes to the life that waited beyond the barn loft." She folded it, tucked it in the hollow of the porch rail. Maybe one day, someone would find it, or maybe it was enough that she wrote it because June was not an ending. It was growth. And what came next was wide open. July rolled in golden. Hot days, slow mornings, even slower evenings. The air smelled of sun-warmed hay and the distant promise of rain. Coralie woke each morning before the sun fully crested the ridge. She'd slip outside, barefoot, into the dew-slick grass. The world was quiet then, just crickets, birds, and the steady thump of her own heart. Hope joined her some mornings, toddling out in oversized boots, carrying a tin cup she filled with wildflowers. "For Mama," she'd say. Coralie never corrected her when weeds slipped in with the petals. Every gift mattered. Wren started keeping a diary. She called it her truth book. Coralie peeked once, only once, on the first page. "When I'm grown, I'll still live near Mama, even if I'm the president." She folded it shut and kissed Wren's forehead. The days passed soft. Until the letter came, folded sharp, sealed in wax. It was from the town council. Coralie was being nominated. To run the school district. Not just their valley. The entire region. The paper slipped from her hands. Sawyer caught it. They see what I see, he said. But what about here? The school? You built this so others could build theirs. Maybe it's time to build bigger. She didn't answer that day, or the next. Instead, she watched Jacob teach a younger boy how to tie a knot. Watched Wren help Hope braid daisies. Watched Sawyer fix the co-op door without a word of complaint, and felt the shape of her life press gently against the shape of her calling. She wrote to the council, I will accept your nomination if you understand one thing. I do not teach from behind a desk. I teach from the dirt, the porch rail, the cracked doorway of a barn. I will serve, but I will not leave this place. I'll ride, I'll write, I'll lead, but this is still my home. They agreed unanimously. The vote came 2 weeks later. The whole valley gathered in the old church. Coralie wore a clean dress, Wren's ribbon in her hair. Jacob stood behind her, straight as a soldier. Hope sat on Sawyer's shoulders, yelling, That's my mama. When the final tally was read, the room erupted. She had won. Not power, not prestige, but trust. That night, Sawyer poured cider into 2 chipped mugs. Coralie held hers tight. Are you proud of me? Every day since you stepped into that barn. She leaned her head to his shoulder. I didn't think the world had room for someone like me. It didn't, he said. You made it. Later, Coralie stood at the porch rail. Wind soft against her cheek. She thought of Mama. Of that girl hiding in the loft. One hand on her belly, one on a stranger's coat. She whispered, We did it. Not just me, all of us. She looked back through the window. Wren asleep with her truth book. Jacob fixing a lantern. Hope curled in Sawyer's arms, and her chest ached. With joy. With memory. With the ache of living fully. And she knew the next season would bring change. Not loss. Not fear, but more. Of everything. Because some stories don't end, they unfold. August brought dust and thunder. The skies darkened in the afternoons, but rain rarely followed. Instead, heat shimmered off the hills like breath, and the ground cracked in spiderweb patterns. Corale kept water jugs by the porch. The children took turns filling them, dragging buckets from the well with grunts and splashes. Hope found it thrilling. Wren found it exhausting. Jacob just did it, without complaint. Sawyer reinforced the fences. The cattle had taken to testing them at dusk, noses pressed to the scent of storms that never came. They're restless, he said. Aren't we all? Coralie replied. One morning, a telegram arrived. The governor himself would be visiting in September. To meet the new district lead. To see the schoolhouse that had become a legend. Coralie stared at the paper. It's just a man, Sawyer said, reading her face. I'm not scared of men anymore, she said softly. But later, alone, she found herself pacing the orchard, whispering practice speeches into the wind. Jacob offered to paint the schoolhouse. Needs to shine, he said. Wren started organizing the key. Library. Hope walked around pointing to things and declaring, That stays. Or that goes, with supreme confidence. Even Sawyer shaved. You trying to impress the governor? Coralie teased. Just trying not to embarrass you. On the day of the visit, the valley turned out in full. Fresh dresses, clean boots. Flowers in every window. Corale wore blue. The same color as the sky before a good rain. The governor was taller than she expected. Kinder too. He listened, asked real questions, and when he turned to leave he said, You're what education should be. Coralie didn't reply, because anything she could say would have dimmed the truth in his words. That night, they held a celebration. Tables stretched from the barn to the well. Bread, roasted squash, cider, laughter that rolled louder than thunder. Wren danced until she tripped and Jacob caught her. Hope tried to ride a goat. Sawyer played the fiddle badly, and Coralie, standing at the head of the longest table, raised her cup. To the ones who believed before we did. To the ones who stayed after others fled. To the children who built something grown men doubted. She paused. And to the woman who once hid in a loft, thinking her life was over only to find it was just beginning. They cheered, but Sawyer just looked at her like he always had, like she was the beginning and the middle and the end. Later, she wrote, "Sometimes the miracle isn't that you survive, it's that you grow roots, that you become shelter for others, that your pain turns into something softer, something strong." She folded the page and tucked it into the hollow of the barn wall, next to the old ribbon, next to the memory, next to the life that came before. Because August hadn't brought rescue, it had brought honor, and Coralie finally understood. She wasn't just a mother or a teacher or even a survivor. She was the storm, and the calm after. September came soft, cool mornings, long shadows. That hint of something ending, even as the days still blazed bright by noon. Coralie began to put things away, the garden harvest, the tools, the summer linens. She found it calming, this gentle shift toward rest. Hope, on the other hand, did not slow. She ran faster, climbed higher, asked harder questions. "Mama, where do clouds sleep?" Coralie answered without thinking. "In barns, just like we used to." Hope nodded solemnly. "Then I'm not scared of thunder anymore." Jacob was growing taller, his hands stronger. Didn't ask before fixing things, now he just did them. One morning, Coralie woke to the smell of eggs frying. She found Jacob in the kitchen, apron on, face flushed. "You always cook," he said. "I thought maybe someone should cook for you." She hugged him so tight he squeaked. Wren had begun keeping records. She made charts, attendance lists, even a list of every plant growing near the schoolhouse. "Someone's got to keep track of history," she said, "or else folks forget how far we've come." Coralie helped her laminate the pages. They'd last through storms that way. Sawyer built a new fence line. No need. No livestock past it, but Coralie understood. Some men build as a way to think, and others build as a way to stay. He was doing both. One afternoon, a girl arrived, barefoot, dusty, clutching a note. Wren found her by the creek. They brought her to Corlea. The note said only, "She's kind. She help. I have nothing left. Corale made tea." Let the girl sit in silence. When night came, she gave her Hope's old quilt and the bed in the corner, not out of pity, out of memory. The next day, the girl spoke. "I don't know who I am." Coralie said, "Neither did I, but I found out here." She handed her a blank journal. "Start where you are." September deepened. Leaves edged gold. The first fire was lit. Children came in smelling of smoke and wind. Coralie began each lesson with a question. Not facts, but wonderings. What would you keep if the world burned down again? What grows in ashes? What do you wish someone had told you sooner? They filled pages. Some answers were silly. Some broke her heart. All were true. One evening, Sawyer brought out an old map. "You ever think about travel?" he asked. She looked at Hope asleep in her lap. "I already crossed 1,000 miles. You never left this valley." "I meant the miles inside me." He nodded. "Maybe someday. But not yet." That night, Coralie wrote, "We are not just the people we used to be. We are the people who made it through, who lit lanterns in the dark, who stayed and loved, and opened the door for others." She folded the page, tucked it into a tin box beneath the schoolhouse floorboards. Because someday, someone else would need to remember, and she would still be there. In the lessons, in the walls. And the girl curled beneath the old quilt. November whispered. Frost crept in through the fields at night, tracing lace across every window pane. Mornings were still, breaths visible, hearts quieter. The valley had grown quiet, but not empty. There was peace now. Earned, shared, held. Corlee woke early on the first day of the month. The house was warm, the stove humming. Hope was curled like a kitten between pillows. Wren's arm dangled from the top bunk, her truth book still open. Jacob was already outside, checking fences. Sawyer sat on the porch rail, coffee in hand, watching. The sky pink N.Coral. He joined him. He didn't speak, didn't need to. She leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder. Together, they watched another day rise. That afternoon, Coralie received a package. No return address. Inside, a photo of a distant town. Children lined up. A tiny schoolhouse with chipped white paint. And on the back, "We started because you did." Coralie sat on the porch step, holding it for a long time, then placed it above the fireplace. Next to Hope's wildflower drawing. Wren's first report card. Jacob's carved duck. A wall of beginnings. Winter approached, but no one feared it. Not this year, because the woodpile was full. The pantry lined with jars. The roof held. The fences stood. And more than that, so did they. The last Sunday of the month, the preacher returned. He didn't preach. He just played the fiddle and told them, "You've made church out of dirt and kindness." No one argued, because they all knew. Some. Faith doesn't live in chapels. It lives in hands, in harvests, in second chances. That night, Coralie tucked Hope into bed. "Tell me a story," Hope said sleepily. "What kind?" "About a brave girl, and her baby, and a barn." Coralie smiled and began. "Once, there was a girl who had nothing, no family, no home, just a name and a hope and a heartbeat beside her." Hope blinked. Up at her. Was she scared? Yes, but brave people often are. Did she make it? "She did more than that," Coralie whispered. "She built something better and let others inside." Later, as the fire dimmed, Coralie sat alone at the kitchen table. She wrote her final page. "I once thought the world ended in that barn loft. But it began there. Love did not arrive all at once, but in hands, in voices, in the gift of being seen. This home is proof that healing is not a finish line. It's a circle. It goes on. And on. And on." She didn't fold this one, didn't hide it. She left it on the WINDOWSILL. For anyone who came after, because the story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to them all. To every hand that lifted. Every word that soothed. Every choice to stay. Outside, snow began to fall. Silent. Soft. Steady. But inside, there was warmth. And light, and the hum of a life grown whole. The end. December wrapped the valley in white. Snow fell steady, weaving blankets over fence rails and footprints alike. The orchard stood bare, branches skeletal against a sky that never left its pale blue paws. Even the barn door smiled under its crust of ice. Coralie woke on the final morning of the year to the hush of snowfall. She slipped from her bed before dawn, careful not to wake Sawyer or the children. The air bit her cheeks as she stepped onto the porch, but in her chest was a warmth that no winter wind could touch. She cupped her hands around a mug of cold cider she'd left out the night before. Steam rose in spirals. Breathing in, she heard the world exhale in quiet gratitude. Inside, the household was stirring. Wren padded down the stairs, slippers clacking, clutching her truth book. Jacob carried his journal, pencil in hand, searching for last thoughts before the year's close. Hope toppled behind him, blanket draped over her head, chanting nonsense syllables that made them all grin. Sawyer appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair tousled, lantern in hand. He poured cider for Coralie, pressing her back against him while she turned to rest her head on his shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "Better than I ever dared to dream." They gathered in the schoolhouse at noon, the last gathering of the year. The walls bore marks of every child's height and every milestone. The floor creaked under the weight of memories. Coralie stood before them, the tray of warm biscuits in her hands. We started with nothing, she began. Voice steady, eyes bright. No name, no family, just a hope. But look at what a hope can do. She passed the tray to Wren, who distributed biscuits like crowns. Jacob cued the old preacher at the piano. Sawyer read aloud her final journal entry for the year. I once thought the world ended in that barn loft, but it began there. Love did. Not arrive all at once, but in hands. In voices, in the gift of being seen. This home is proof that healing is not a finish line, it's a circle. It goes on. And on. And on. Tears glimmered in the eyes of neighbors, friends, and strangers who had come to call this place sacred ground. That evening, they lit candles in every window. A soft glow spread across the snow like a promise. Children built snowmen outside. Scarves flapping, shouting invitation. The librarian delivered one last crate of books. The traveling preacher played hymns until the stars blinked awake. Inside, Coralie tucked Hope into her crib for the last time before the new year. Wren pulled her quilt snug. Jacob recited the final line of his latest poem. In the hush of snow, we find our song. Sawyer closed the door behind them. The air smelled of cedar and cinnamon, and something like victory. They fell asleep by the fire, 3 generations of survivors. Dreamers and builders. Coralie's hand found Sawyer's, her heart full of gratitude in a way that words could never. Hold. Outside, the snowfall slowed, then stopped. The new moon peeked through clouds like a shy smile. The ranch lay peaceful, whole, ready for whatever lay beyond its gate. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.